Good afternoon, Gerard. It's so good to be able to catch up with you finally, albeit with you still across the Atlantic in Scotland.
It's been a while, hasn't it?
Terrible.
Trying to work out, I think the last time I was over was 2016.
I know, that was when we first met, when you had your wonderful exhibit going on down at GCU.
That's right. And we were almost there. We were actually with Billy Connolly in Hong Kong. He came over for an event in Hong Kong with the year he was Grand Marshal.
Yeah.
And for 2 pins, we were going to come back to New York with him. He flew directly from Hong Kong back to New York to be Grand Marshal, but it just proved to be just a bridge too far for us. So yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while.
He was so wonderful. What a great Grand Marshal. And we're all looking forward to 2022. So we'll get to that in a bit. But we're really glad you can join us today when we look at Scotland and art at this moment. And no one is better positioned to talk to us who are leading Scottish artists at this time. And what has influenced your work and the progression of it? Could you tell us a little bit about how your careers come together and a little bit of background?
I've gone a very unusual route. I was a teacher for many years, and I lost the love of art. I lost it completely when I came out of art school, almost unthinkable for someone like me. So it took me quite a number of years to find that again. And actually I rediscovered the love through teaching, through actually being involved with materials, working with kids. And I began to paint seriously when I was a teacher. So that would be in the early 90s. And I had quite considerable success as a painter at that point, although I was principal teacher, so the time available to paint was really limited.
Were your works similar to what they are now, or were you evolving?
I think evolving. What I would do at that point was I only had a certain amount of time, so I would pick one big theme, and it would maybe take me 6 or 8 months to make the painting because I only had maybe an hour a day in the evenings to work on it. But all of these themes from the early days, the saltires, the mythological works, all of these themes have stayed with me actually throughout my career. And my interpretation, my approach to the paintings has changed over the years, but these actual, the symbolism, the ideas has kind of stayed with me.
So was portraiture playing a role at that time, or were you working in this larger subject?
Portraiture's always been in there. I am a painter of people. That's how I define myself. So as a consequence, I can make portraits. And I found to my delight early on that there was a demand for portraits, that people liked the idea of portraits. And basically in the early days, it was a way of making some extra money. People would pay a certain amount. I mean, I think about the first ones were maybe 500 quid. And then it went up to £1,000, and then it went up to £5,000. So initially there was a real kind of buzz from that. But portraiture for me, and I suspect going forward, portraiture will be how I am known, possibly in terms of legacy. And I've discovered that I am good at portraits, not because I can paint faces, but because I understand the psychology of a portrait. I understand what people are looking for in a portrait. And then basically through our kind of layers of psychology, that's translated into oil and canvas. But
your portraits are not, as you say, just of a person.
No.
And that's how I first met you, really. Oh, well, I'd met you before, but I really got to know you a little bit more, was when you did that wonderful exhibit. Because that series of portraits, they were all in amazing situ.
Yeah.
So can you talk a bit about that, so that, you know, nobody was just sitting on a chair looking at you?
So a portrait you have to ask, first of all, why would you bother? Why would you have a portrait painted? It can be a flattery portrait. It can be the commemoration of an event, a retirement. It can be whatever. But I really think if you're going to go to the bother of making a portrait, why not try to build in the way the old masters did? Why not try to build in a bit more than just, this is what this person looked like? You think about the masters, Rembrandt, Velasquez, Titian, of course. There were all sorts of wonderful hidden clues. So there was a narrative woven into the portrait. And I suppose that one of the most famous at that point, I painted the current First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon.
No.
It's a fantastic piece, and it's actually interesting. So Nicola really was not long First Minister at the point where I painted her. And in that portrait, I wanted to say quite a number of things about this young woman. I painted her in Bute House, and I painted her in a very traditional setting. But in the portrait, you have this vibrant, young, energetic woman in a red dress.
The red dress.
The red dress, and the pose is quite provocative. It's quite kind of, we would say in Glaswegian, quite gallus, you know. It's a bit kind of almost bring it on. So that really mattered. It said something about her attitude and her energy. And behind her in the portrait is a painting by Raeburn, the absolute preeminent, the greatest Scottish portrait painter of all times. So there's a bit of devilment in my part when I'm actually painting my portrait before the Raeburn. So these layers are all there, they're all woven into the thing. But when you see the painting, basically, initially, all you see is the subject. And then the rest of it is there for you to explore, or for me to explain.
And when you were talking earlier, you explained that these series really have been with you for quite a time. So the Salter, which is probably one of your most iconic, series that you're very well known for, has been going, as you say, since the 90s. Are you going to be adding to that? It has such a strong Scottish identity, and your love of the outside, the wolves and the stags alongside these powerful images.
I need to get you on as an agent. That sounded great. So yeah, so Camilla, what you've got to appreciate is that when I first made that painting, the very, very first one, the Rowan, which ultimately hung behind Alex Salmond's desk the whole time he was First Minister. When I first made that painting, everybody was saying, what on earth is this about? What on earth is this painting about? The Saltire itself occupies nearly 85% of the canvas. In the push for the build up to the referendum and the push for independence, because of the fact that that was in the Parliament, these paintings, that painting really rocketed in terms of public perceptions. I'd begun to work away at the theme, that the Saltire had begun to bleed back into my work, but people were saying things like, gosh, you jumped on that bandwagon. I didn't, I was doing it for a long time previously, and they finally had their day. These paintings had their day. And you're right, these have become, they're embedded in Scottish culture of the new century. They are synonymous with that period in Scottish history, irrespective of which side of the argument you were on.
I think they're your love of Scotland.
I think, well, and people say, well, so why did I paint it? At that point, I would say I was probably apolitical.
Yeah.
And my answer to that would be because I'm Scottish. As an artist, Camilla, what you're doing is you're looking always for the thing from all of the infinite range of possibilities which presents itself over and over again. And everywhere I went in the world, every photograph I saw where the saltire was in it, I thought, I'm going to have to do something with that. It just jumped out at me. So to me, it was obvious. I was really thinking, I can't believe nobody else has done this at that point. And as I say, you know, it's gone on a journey.
But
since.
you know, then I look at your work and I see these beautiful dancers who are the total antithesis, the opposite.
Okay.
And the understanding of the form of the dance and the ballerinas, where does that fit in? How did that come to be?
Okay, so that's a New York story as well. I've been working with dancers for many years, unofficially. And in 2016, Scottish Ballet, I think you may have been at it, we did a pop-up event in the Norwood Club. Now, I had been trying for years to build a relationship with Scottish Ballet. They are incredibly protective of the brand. Because of that event in New York, the First Minister was there, Chris Hampson, the director of Scottish Ballet, was there. And because we were all in the one room, I was able to say to Chris Hampson, listen, Chris, let me come and take some images. Let me come and be involved. I think we could really do something together. I think it's a great brand match. So got back to Scotland and he said to me, look, just come in. Let's see what you find. And they let me go backstage for
behind the curtain.
Behind the curtain. But so all of these things are an adventure. If you go with too fixed an idea, often what happens is you miss the obvious. So I went into that situation with no clue whatsoever. I knew I wanted to do something, but I really had no idea what that something would be. And what I discovered to my amazement was, I'm not really interested in the dance. What I'm interested in is that same thing, and lots of my other work, that's slightly voyeuristic. You're looking from behind, past the dancer, out onto that performance space. Now, I couldn't have made that up. Had I gone with that idea, it would have looked staged, it would have looked, but that's what I found.
But you also haven't taken them from the front.
No, exactly. So there's that anonymity.
Yeah, and I love that behind behind the line, at the backstage, looking out. It's a wonderful series and it's so different. It shows this wonderful, it's another dimension.
Got to remember, I do this for a living. You know, I make paintings for a living. And all of the themes which have become established started at some point, the saltires and everything else, at a point where people maybe initially were saying, not too sure about this. These ballet paintings have been a success from the moment the very first one made it off the easel. They've been an incredible success for me. And I suppose the challenge for me, the shadow of Degas hangs so heavily over everything relating to the ballet. In order to justify the effort and the energy involved, I had to be able to say something else. So I think that these images, because of the extremities in terms of dark and light, because of the viewpoint, that vantage point, I've brought something else to the genre, if you like.
And then I notice there are these wonderful sculptures beginning to appear within your work. What are you, has sculpture always been something you've done? And what is this a progression that you want to do? Are you going to stay small? Are you going to start being massive and doing public art? What are your thoughts?
The sculptures came about as a consequence of lockdown. No ifs, no buts. It's something I've been trying to do for the best part of 10 years. I knew I could sculpt. I have sculpted, but trying to actually find that one day in the midst of everything else that's going on to say, okay, I'm going to spend today working on sculpture. I never seem to manage to find that day. As a consequence of lockdown, I mean, my studio is here in the grounds of the garden in the house. I found that in the studio, I simply couldn't paint every day. I couldn't do it. I felt quite physically sick actually going up to the studio. I just couldn't do it. So it was a real challenge for me. Big serious questions like, what kind of artist am I? This should be the dream. But I couldn't do it. So what I did was I moved sideways and I thought, well, what else could I be doing in the studio that I haven't been doing? And the sculpture just screamed out at me. So it allowed me to be in the studio without a brush in my hand. And really, initially, that's all it was. I had no idea what I was going to do with it. I had no particular idea what direction it would go in. And basically, these sculptures presented themselves, the Minotaur sculptures. I didn't set out to make one of those. That's just the way it went. I created a certain amount and I thought, well, this ties in with the paintings, so why not? And again, it's leaving yourself open to possibility rather than having too fixed an idea. Now that I've done it, it would appear that there is, again, a huge demand. The Minotaur sculptures in particular have been extremely well received. And the dream would be to be able to push on and to scale it up. But we'll see. That takes me into another realm, actually, in terms of the technical challenges. I would probably need to involve extra help to really be doing things on that scale. At the moment, I can go up to the studio and I can make a sculpture. As soon as you start taking that up, there's huge logistics.
Engineers and others.
Yeah.
But you've obviously used this past 15 months and been very busy, because there also is a book that came out, isn't there, during this time? Or was that already underway prior to lockdown?
Lockdown has actually been extremely productive for me. I speak to lots of people and everybody says nobody did everything they said they were going to do during lockdown. I've heard that 100 times. People were going to learn to play guitar and learn to play flute, and I did. Now, I'm not boasting at that. My problem is I don't have an off button. I don't have the ability just to absorb time. I need to be engaged.
You don't like being lazy.
I can't. I know it's not even I don't like. I can't. It really eats away at me. So the book, again, was something I've been trying. My life has gone in lots of wonderful, odd directions. And I've learned, if I've learned one thing, there comes a point where you have to stop pushing hard on a thing. If it's not going to happen, sometimes you need to just back off. And I've been trying with that book unsuccessfully for the last 12 years. It's involved lots of heartache. It involved quite a lot of wasted money. And then an opportunity presented itself right out the blue. I'm going to mention Celtic Football Club once again. In the boardroom at Celtic Football Club, I met this young woman who's a senior partner in a book publishing company in Glasgow. And they basically said, come and see us, we'll print your book for you. So they produced this beautiful, high-end, full colour. It's a thing of beauty in itself. But this is what I mean, the time was right. And as soon as I had that conversation, whoosh, it took maybe 7 months to pull it together.
Well, I look forward to seeing the book, but more than anything, I look forward to seeing you back in New York with us soon, or with us, being able to come back over to Scotland and to catch up with you personally. But I do hope we can keep the conversation going in the coming months, and you can give us some insight into different things that are going on. But I'm so glad we had a chance to chat today.
Brilliant, Camilla. Great to speak to you as always. Stay well.
We will, and to
Okay.
you too. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Good afternoon, May, and thank you for joining us from across the pond in Edinburgh
Well,
today.
Thank you. It's a almost sunny afternoon here in Edinburgh. We had to have some lovely weather, but spring is on its way. So
Exactly.
yeah.
And I was so delighted when it was possible for us to arrange to speak to you today, because you have a very important Scottish art sale coming up on May 13th. And within it, there is a group of artists where you are known as the Scottish Colorists, who, and there were only 4 of them that made up this movement, but you have works from all 4 of them in this sale. Could you speak a little bit to that and explain the impact of the Scottish colorists upon contemporary art, you know, after their time in the early 1920s, 1910?
Yeah, wonderful. Well, as you say, this is part of our Scottish art sale. We have 2 art sales a year here in Edinburgh, one in May, one in October. And we normally have between, say, 100 and 150 items in each sale, but it is the best of Scottish art throughout the centuries that we present to our clients. And this sale on the 13th of May is particularly wonderful for me to talk about, because we do have fantastic examples of all 4 colorists in the auction, which is, you know, quite an unusual thing to see. It looks gorgeous, the sale room. I've just finished hanging it today and it looks to die for. It's so wonderful. So yeah, so the 4 colorists, they are Scottish artists: Peploe, Cadell, Hunter and Ferguson. And they were really a set of radical artists in their day, who enlivened the Scottish art scene with fresh vibrancy of the French Fauves colours. So the Fauves were a movement within the French art scene at the time, and they really loved what they were seeing when they travelled to France, and brought this knowledge and this fantastic sense of colour and life and working outdoors, and brought all of that back to Scotland, and really dragged not just Scottish art but British art as well into the 20th century. There was a fantastic exhibition at the Gallery of Modern Art here in Edinburgh a few years ago, and there was a fantastic quote on the wall, and it said, "Modern art arrived in Scotland the day that Ferguson moved to France." And it's so true. I think if he hadn't gone to Paris, who knows how long it would have taken for Scottish art to take this giant leap forward. It was so exciting, so vibrant and colourful, and
Very
really
bold.
very bold, yeah. And people think that they were a close-knit group, these 4 colorists, but actually it was a term that didn't really come into art history world until about the 1950s, when the art historian T.J. Honeyman used it as the title of his book. In fact, then it was the 3 colorists, and that was in 1950. And it wasn't until the 1980s when Ferguson was also acknowledged and added to this group. So they didn't see themselves as a colorist, they just saw themselves as the movers and shakers of the art world, full stop. And thanks very much. Scotland should move forward and appreciate the talents. And my golly, we appreciate them today, that's for sure.
And what are your favorite works? Because they each have several works coming up in this auction. What do you really love as an example from each?
Yes, well, as auctioneers, of course, we can't have favourites, but what we do have, what we do have are some fantastic examples of each of them. So hopefully your listeners will be able to see some images, but I have picked out a few to talk about today. And I thought I would start off with the star lot of the auction is the Peploe Still Life. And that is lot 51. It is a fantastic showstopper. Peploe is really considered the leader of the Scottish colorists, mainly because he was the oldest, and he was particularly, as I say, influenced by the French Fauves, and he moved to Paris in 1910. and these still lifes that he has throughout his career slightly change in mood and colour, but this one here is a real homage to Cézanne, and he struck commercial success with this formula, really trying his goal really was to achieve the perfect still life, and he was meticulous and methodical about his composition, his colours, his forms, his tones. And to me, I mean, I can really see the Paul Cézanne influence here, but Peploe has his own distinctive take on it. And the colours, the jewel-like colours of the apples and the pears, gorgeous crumpled fabric behind it, it really is absolutely stunning painting to stand in front of, and I'm thrilled to have it. So that would probably be the Peploe of choice, perhaps. Hunter, and he was a very interesting artist in terms of he was slightly the outlier of the group, and particularly maybe your listeners will be interested to hear that he emigrated to the United States with his family in 1892, and he was pretty much a self-taught artist. Actually, he started work as an illustrator out there and set up a studio in San Francisco, but sadly it was destroyed in the earthquake of 1906, and he moves back to Glasgow to start afresh. So he too then travels to Europe and sees a lot of the French artists at the time, and he went to this amazing exhibition with his friend Honeyman, and to see this 1925 exhibition, and he was just in love with Matisse. He could not believe what he was seeing. He fell in love with it. He actually convinced his friend William McInnes to buy a Matisse, which is now in Glasgow's in the museums and galleries there. So the George Leslie Hunter, lot 37, your listeners might particularly be interested in Hunter because in fact he wasn't Scottish based for his early years. He actually emigrated with his family to California in 1892, and he's very much self-taught, set up as an illustrator, and he had an amazing studio in San Francisco, but of course that got destroyed in the 1906 earthquake, and he moves back to Glasgow, sets up here, and then travels in France, and he goes to this most wonderful exhibition in 1925 with his friend William McInnes, and falls in love with Matisse. He actually manages to convince his friend to buy a stunning Matisse, which now can be seen in the Glasgow galleries. And that too is of anemones. And here we see in this example, lot 37, gorgeous. The texture of the anemones is wonderful, in a yellow vase with exotic fruit, including a banana, which is obviously quite different of its time. But the vibrancy, the colour, I mean, for those of us who can't afford Matisse, this is the next best thing. So I think that's particularly a fantastic example. And that actually has come from America, a private collection in the States. And our colleagues out there have saw it and recommended sell it in Edinburgh. And of course, we are the only international auctioneers who have Scottish art sales in Scotland. So it's wonderful that it's coming back home over here to be sold. The Ferguson, which I think is beautiful, is a Parisian street scene. I'll just get that in front of me because it's absolutely Paris to a T. The colours, the shapes, the form, it's very, very modern. Painted in circa 1908. It's very painterly, and I know that's a funny thing to describe an oil painting as being painterly, but when you can see almost the oil being squidged out of the tube and, you know, straight directly onto the panel, that's an art lover's painting if ever I saw one. It's very nice, and it's got the wonderful inscription on the back as well, so that's particularly wonderful. And Cadell, well, I would probably say for me the watercolor of the two workmen, it's called Tying the Rick, and you've got a fantastic scene, a chap smoking a pipe with a cap on at the bottom of a ladder, shouting up to his pal who's at the top, and he's looking down, but it is so evocative of the 20s, 30s. Really amazing composition. Cadell was such a skilled draftsman. He was just naturally gifted at art. Born and raised in Edinburgh, and he trained in Munich and Venice, and he really was the darling of the art scene in Edinburgh. He also obviously travelled to France too, and saw what was going on. But to me, his draftsmanship is really quite staggering, and he can do a quick watercolor like this and it just be phenomenal. So I would probably choose that as the cattle of choice in this sale. And that's very reasonable. That's, you know, 5,000 to 8,000. So we can offer you colorists at all ends of the spectrum.
But the thing about this is they are a wonderful group of artists to think about collecting, because they have really they are just being appreciated more and more as time goes by. But this sale isn't only about that movement. It, as you said, it's a Scottish art sale, and it's got some wonderful early works as well. And so if you look at the sale in total, what would you also sort of spotlight without using the word favorites?
Yes, thank you. Well, the great thing, of course, when you're working in a department which is nationality based rather than period of art, you encounter everything over hundreds of years, and lot one of the sale is definitely something that is a great example of how varied my job can be. So lot one is a wonderful plumbago miniature portrait by a fantastic artist called James Ferguson. Now, he was working in the 18th century, and it's really, he's a fascinating figure. He was a farmer's boy who couldn't read or write, but he was essentially a genius, and went on to become Britain's greatest astronomer of his time. But to fund that, he had to come up with a way of income, and he was a good draftsman, and he drew using plumbago as graphite. So it's these little pencil drawings, or then he moved on to Indian ink drawings. But we've got 10 lots, some of them are group lots, some of them are standalone. Like lot one is Bonnie Prince Charlie, and he got a wonderful look about him. And James Ferguson really manages to evoke the character of the sitter in a wonderful way. But they are just very interesting. I could spend so long looking at them all the ladies, different hairdos and lace bonnets, and some of them we know who the sitters are, some of them we don't. So it's a fantastic little project out there for people who want to research their ancestors, and you know, really interesting, quite affordable.
And then what other pieces might you suggest in general?
Well, the other great, well, there's so many great movements in the world of Scottish art, but one that people will have heard of is the Glasgow Boys. And Cornell, he was a Glasgow boy involved in that movement, then slightly came away from it with George Henry, and they set up their own art movement. And of course, they traveled together in Japan and really embraced what the Japanese art world can offer in terms of composition and how you frame in terms of the movement within one picture, tightly bringing it in, the flatness, the perspective. And he brought that back to Scotland. And then he then moved into a very different sort of movement of art, which was extremely commercially successful, of young girls in the Galloway countryside. But what we have here in lot 21 is a very exciting painting. I've called it Skipping. It doesn't have a title, but it's got great movement in it. It's a group of girls skipping in the countryside with their auburn locks flowing, wonderful patterned fabrics in their clothing. And it's exciting for me because it's painted in 1896, shortly after he's come back from Japan, before he strikes this very commercial career. And this is really one of the last treasures of his early to mid period. And there are fantastic examples in all the national collections, but this is not recorded. It's actually been in the same family for about 100 years and nobody's ever seen it. So for me as an art valuer to call to say we've got a Hornell, okay, yes, we sell Hornell quite regularly, but then to hear it's in 1896 and your ears perk up and you think, great, and they describe it and you're literally getting in the car and you're driving to go and see it. For me, that's wonderful to see an important painting that's been in a family they didn't really know much about it, and to be able to tell them how important their mom's pictures were, you know, that's really what makes my job as interesting as it is, and to then be able to put it into a stunning sale surrounded by other really top-notch artwork, give it its best chance, and I think it should do very well indeed. And then I suppose let's talk about some maybe more obscure artists that your listeners might not know but should know, and that probably everybody should know. We've got 4 wonderful paintings by a Scottish artist called John Smiley. Now it's spelt Smelly but pronounced Smiley, and his dates were 1886 to 1925, so he died young and never really got into the full stride of his career. But the wonderful painting, lot 33, it's called In Summer, and it is painted probably circa 1921. And I just thought it's a very, very classy painting. It's very Lavery in style, if your listeners know John Lavery. And it's of Millport, a West Coast island. We've got some very smartly dressed couples walking along this promenade, and it's got a lovely, peaceful sereneness to it. But I found it interesting because, of course, we're 100 years on, but this beach in 1921 was the place to be, full of people who were forced to holiday at home because that's what they could afford, but enjoying the Scottish sunshine when it shines. And now 100 years on, we're doing the same thing. We're forced to stay at home, not because we can't afford to travel around, or we don't have the technology to do so, but because we're not allowed to travel abroad. And this promenade will be equally as busy, maybe not so glamorously inhabited, but I just thought it was a very interesting contrast in time. But really, it's such a beautiful Scottish seafront, and that is a very important piece, so rare. I mean, because his career was short, there's not that many around, so when you find a good one, and this is an excellent example, to me that's very exciting. That again has come from a private collector. And then perhaps something that I'm passionate about everything, of course, in my sale, but there's been a great recognition in female artists being underrepresented in collections, both private and public. And there's fantastic group of ink and watercolour by Annie French, who was a Glasgow girl, and they're being sold by one of her relatives. So again, it's lovely to have market fresh pieces that are treasured items within their homes, but more people should know about them. So lot 22 would be the other standout item of interest, and again quite affordable at £1,000. It's a beautiful, exquisitely drawn black and white illustration of a lady. I've called it handkerchief because she's crying into a handkerchief, but Annie French, she could draw, and she was influenced by the pre-Raphaelites and the Art Nouveau movement. So she went to the Glasgow School of Art. She was one of the first really generation of women who were able to go to art college under the fantastic teacher Francis Newbery, who embraced female artists coming in. His sister was an artist, so of course that helped the movement greatly. But she has this wonderful way of drawing floating garments and decorating with elaborate floral patterns, so delicately done, so classy. She's often compared to artists like Beardsley. In fact, people at the time thought she was copying him, but it was actually probably perhaps the other way around. But just because of her gender, was seen as an illustrator rather than an artist. So it's lovely to have these. We've got 5 works by her, as I say, being sold by a relative, and I think they're really important. And hopefully people will see that.
About discovering and the curating of a sale seems to be a wonderful part of what you do, because this sale is there and it's all hanging up, but take us actually back a few steps and how this all comes together, and putting it and finding the art. And do you work with Bonhams around the world to bring together the Scottish art that maybe comes into them from South Africa suddenly, or the United States?
Yes, I have to say I'm incredibly lucky to have an amazing network of colleagues around the world and around the UK, and I get inquiries on a daily basis from very far-flung places, and you think, how did that picture get there? Well, of course, the Scots were great, you know, travellers and migrated across the globe, but it can be a phone call, it can be an email, it can be just a routine insurance valuation update, but you never know what's going to be around the corner. And just when you think your sale is full and you can't possibly get any more lots in on time, you get a wonderful phone call and inquiry comes through, and of course we act quickly, and because we've got this fantastic group around the world, we can facilitate that, and it's lovely. And people do like the idea of Scottish art coming home and being sold in Edinburgh. And we've got the most gorgeous Georgian sale rooms with lovely skylights and chandeliers, and it looks fantastic when you put it all together. But there certainly is a fine art to almost curating a sale and deciding what would complement what. It is great that I've got such a vast time period to choose from and to represent. And I enjoy that, the fact you can have a 18th century portrait right up to a Jack Vettriano portrait, you know, painted in the last couple of decades. So there's something for everybody, and we're delighted to put forward such a fantastic sale. As I say, with all these colorists in, just makes it extra special, and it looks wonderful. So
I think what's also technology is helping us with is allowing us, even if we're sitting in New York or San Francisco, to join you in Edinburgh and be a part of this sale. And it isn't difficult to bid and to look at what's going on beforehand. So they can go to Bonhams, they can register, and you've got a great catalogue there with very full descriptions. So I think that's one of the exciting things about what has happened in the last few years, and especially made us aware of in the last, you know, this lockdown period.
Yes, it's been fantastic to certainly have a huge audience that maybe weren't buying art 2 years ago, that now have discovered that actually it's easy, or relatively easy, to buy art sitting at home. If you've got an app on your phone, with Bonhams have an app, we have the website. But even before you get to the buying stage, just to see what's out there. And we do have an illustrated catalogue online on bonhams.com. If you go to either the catalogue section or the Scottish art section, you can browse through the images, you can really zoom in close, you can see quite a lot of detail, and just see the breadth and the choice that is out there. Because yes, of course, we do have the more expensive price range, but also we cover, you know, I think that we start at £500 in this sale, and we go right up to £120,000. So, oh, sorry, 120,000. Yes, I did say thousand. I thought I dropped off 1,000 there. So there really is something for everybody, but it's maybe not so much almost, you know, I want people to register and bid straight away. Of course, that's our business, but just to really educate yourself on the breadth of Scottish art, the talent, and I'm very proud to put this sale forward. So please go online, have a look, and just, even if it's out your budget, just imagine what your ideal art collection would look like. Because if you fall in love with oil but you can't afford that, you know, let me know, because the next time I have a drawing or a print coming up, I will contact you and say, I know you love the Iona scenes by Peploe and Cadell. We couldn't unfortunately maybe help you that time around, but here's actually something perfect for you. So I'm always eager to hear what people are looking for, even if it's not this particular sale, for the ones in the future.
Well,
Hi, Bob. It's absolutely brilliant to see you. How are you today?
Jamie, it's nice to see you too. Thanks for having me. I'm very well, very well. We're right in the middle of things here at the festival. So we've got some live events coming up in May, but at the moment what I'm doing is pre-recording events. So it's a busy schedule. Not too bad today. Tomorrow, literally all day tomorrow, I'm just sitting in a studio recording author events. Nice job, actually.
Absolutely. Well, we're all very much looking forward to the I Write Festival. And as the programmer for the I Write Festival, you are right in the middle of the action, and it's all coming up. It's all coming up very soon, from the 14th to the 23rd of May. I was wondering, please, Bob, if you could give us a general overview of the I Write Festival for this year, please.
Sure. That's right. First of all, it's all my fault. So if you don't like what's on I Write, you can blame me. Obviously, obviously things are a bit different this year. Normally, the festival would be taking place physically in the Mitchell Library in Glasgow, beautiful old building right in the city centre of Glasgow. This year, of course, due to all the reasons that everybody understands, we've had to move the festival online. I felt very strongly that I should try and keep the spirit of I Write going, even though we were online. So I've tried to have the usual sort of mix of events, which is, you know, some big names, some well-known people you'll have seen on the telly, and best-selling authors. So we've got people like Sam Heughan, the Outlander actor, who's appearing with Graham McTavish, talking about their book Clanlands. We've got Maggie O'Farrell, who won the Women's Prize last year. Douglas Stewart, the author of Shuggie Bain, who won the Booker Prize. We've got Richard Thompson, the famous old folk legend, member of Fairport Convention. He's coming to talk about his autobiography. So we've got those kind of big kind of headliner names that you would expect. I Write's always had a reputation for being a sort of festival of ideas and non-fiction, really. So we've always done very well in areas like politics and memoir, sport, music, cookery even. So we do very well in sort of non-fiction areas, as well as these big sort of prize-winning novelists. So there's quite a lot of that this year. There's a lot of writing on the environment. Obviously Glasgow, the city where the festival originated, is going to be the host to the COP26 conference in November this year, when world leaders will be coming into Glasgow. So there's a number of events in the programme this year on climate science, climate change.
Excellent.
Some really nice memoirs. And then another area that we're very, very passionate about is debut writers and new writers. So we've got 3 sessions this year dedicated just to debut writers. Scottish debut writers in one session, fiction debuts, and then crime fiction, loads and loads of crime published. But the festival feels, as I say, we feel very strongly that you know, tomorrow's big names are today's debuts, and debut writers, I think, more than anyone else, have really suffered during the past year, because they've, you know, slaved away for years on these beloved books, and then the books have come out and all the bookshops are closed and the libraries are closed and the schools are closed, and there's nowhere really for them to go out and do talks and get promotion for the book. So we felt very sorry for the debut writers this year. So yeah, I think there's more than 20 debut writers featuring in the programme this year.
Fantastic, absolutely brilliant. It's so important to give a platform to, you know, the writers that are just brand new on the scene, and certainly it's always very exciting when you feel like you've discovered a new talent. As a festival of ideas, Bob, is there an overarching theme for the festival this year?
We don't do an overarching theme, Jamie. I know it's something that other festivals do. I sometimes find they can be a wee bit restrictive. So if you've got something like transformation, or do you then try and make every event fit into that theme, or do you only program things that fit in? So no, we've never done that. What I would say is that every year there are definitely themes that emerge from the publishing program. So we are largely driven by the new books that are coming out. We've got good relationships with all the publishers and agents in the UK and now internationally. I mean, the other thing we didn't mention really with the festival being online is that it's opened up many, many more international authors. So, you know, we've got those kind of relationships, and you always see things that will start to come through. So things like Black Lives Matter, obviously big news stories like that will translate into publishing. The Me Too movement of a few years ago, that's seen a rise in a lot of memoirs dealing with that sort of thing. So the themes do appear, even though we haven't necessarily set them.
Absolutely. And how has the transition been for the festival to being a mostly online event this year?
So it's interesting. It's made some things easier and it's made some things much more difficult. So as I've just said, we've got authors this year. The festival is largely going to look like this. It's going to look like, you know, people speaking on, it's not Zoom, but a Zoom-like platform. And but being online has meant I've got authors coming in to the platform from California, from Texas, from New York, from Brisbane in Australia, from Oslo, from Dublin, from London, you know. So it's made, in a way, the festival a more global and more outward looking and welcoming inward festival. But, you know, there's just nothing like meeting in a room full of people and face-to-face conversation. So for all, it's made some of the programming exciting and made some of the programming easier to bring those people in. I think a lot of people are going to miss the indescribable feeling of actually, you know, being in a room. I did manage to chair one, so I'm chairing one session. We had 3 authors who were all in Glasgow. We were able to do it with social distancing under all of the rules, and it was so lovely. So we've got one event in the program with myself and 3 authors speaking face to face, just like normal humans used to do. So that was really nice.
Absolutely. No, there's certainly nothing like a night out in Glasgow in general. So certainly having that unique atmosphere of being able to come together in Glasgow is always a very special thing. I was wondering,
it's very special for authors too. I think one of the things that authors really like about going to book festivals is they get to meet other authors. They get to hang about in the green room and have a gossip and catch up on, you know, who's got the big advances and who you know, who's been doing what to who and all that kind of stuff. So I think authors really miss the fact when they're coming into just an individual Zoom like this, they don't have any, there's no socializing.
Absolutely. And I know that you touched upon it just a wee while ago, but I was wondering if you could pick out a few of the highlights of the festival for this year, please, Bob.
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned some of the sort of bigger names there. I'll maybe why don't I give you some Scottish people? So we've got Andrew Marr, the Scottish broadcaster. He's doing a session we normally do at the festival called The Books That Made Me. It's a little bit like Desert Island Discs, if people are familiar with the Desert Island Discs Radio 4 programme. It's like that, but for books rather than music. So we get a well-known person to talk about 5 or 6 of their favourite books. We've got a brilliant debut crime writer, a guy called Robbie Morrison. He's quite well known in the world of comics. He's written a lot for comics, but this is his first fiction novel. It's called Edge of the Grave, and it's set between 1930s Glasgow and the First World War. So the book travels back and forward in time. Really brilliant book, fabulous on sort of locations and period, and a really strong character. It's the first in a series, and you can see that the series will go on to great things. We've got a session on Scottish wind power and renewable energy. So I said we've got quite a lot of climate-related books, and Todd Westbrook has written a short, sharp history of Scottish wind power. So he'll be coming along to the festival. We've got a really fascinating history, a session on slavery and the Scottish, generally in Scotland, but Glasgow specifically, and the links with slavery and the money that was made out of slavery. And the event is Craig Lamont, who's written a book about, it's more about the buildings and about the physical legacy of slavery in our cities. And then Alex Renton has written a very a moving sort of family memoir. So he looks back into the history of his own family to uncover some of the more uncomfortable parts of his own story. His book's called Blood Legacy. So yeah, there's a few for you.
Certainly look forward to joining those events. I think it's very important that we discuss them, so certainly look forward to that.
Yeah.
And can you tell me about the festival pass, please, Bob?
So, Jamie, we're doing something different this year. So normally when the festival's physical, it's just normal tickets and you buy a ticket for the session that you want to see. This year, because it's online, we thought we would do something different. So we're actually doing a festival pass. So for the bargain price of only £50, you can come and see absolutely everything at the festival. So that's 65 events. In total, I think we've got more than 140 authors taking place, all for 50 quid. So it's a wee bit different. You can still buy individual tickets. So if you just want to see one thing, you can buy an individual ticket.
It is an absolute bargain, and I certainly look forward to viewing it and sharing with our American Scottish Foundation members and friends very soon. Can you tell us the website for the iWrite Festival, please, Bob?
Yeah, it's just www.iWrite, which is AYEWRITE.com.
Fantastic. We're so looking forward to the iWrite Festival from the 14th to 23rd of May. It's an absolute pleasure to speak with Bob McDevitt, programmer for the iWrite Festival today. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks a lot, Jamie. Nice to see you.
Thank you. All the best.